Good morning, everyone. This is Fran Lewis. This is MJ Network. MJ in memory of my sister, Marcia Joyce. And we have the author of Six to Carry the Casket and one to say the Master's Book weighs more than I do. But I really like it. So let me do a little introduction while I put my reading glasses on so I can see. Oh, these are not as great, but what can you do? Six to Carry the Casket is not really a nostalgic look back at the author's upbringing to also a journey of self-discovery. Hasselman candidly explores his identity as a gay man within the content of a traditional Catholic family. His reflections on the navigating acceptance add another layer of depth and intrigue. He writes with grace, vulnerability, allows readers to see his struggles to reconcile different parts of himself. And I did post a review this morning.
Oh, thank you.
Once my site let me correct how I spell it. And this is interesting because my cousin Angie is married to Nicole. Yes. And I love them both. I'm going to get to see them next week.
Was that a journey for them with your family and community?
No, my family, her mother understood. Her father still hasn't after 12
Mm.
years. And she's got two of the most great kids in the world. And I'm going to see them next week because I'm allowed to bring anything I want to spoil them. One is into Lego and one is a reader. So Kenley Rose is like me, a reader. So I got her a whole graphic set of graphic books and whatever she wanted, and I got him a 3-in-1 Lego playset so we can get in trouble. No, but my family is very mixed, and when Angie and I when she told me, I said it's whatever makes you happy, not what anybody else makes happy.
Mm.
So what can I say? Okay, now I have your questions, your talking points. I think it's just easier if I refer to
Sure.
them. Okay, you are not stuck with the identity you inherited. I'm amazed. So how do you begin to question your identity when at birth? Because I had a lot of questions about mine at times too.
Yeah. Identity, I think we think of identity as a fixed thing. I think oftentimes we think about identity as something we're given and then we're stuck with for the rest of our lives, and that we have to run with it. And if the identity doesn't feel right, it's our fault. It's not
Yeah,
a question of the right identity or the right environment. So I think like any way of knowing ourselves, I don't think it's helpful to think of it as a fixed, an absolute thing. Um, Instead, I think of identity as a tool, as a tool for understanding ourselves and others, and you know, as we do grow in understanding, we reveal new layers of ourselves, or we find new ways of coming alive. When we start to use identity more as a tool for understanding, what am I interested in? What is my body telling me that I have in common with those people over there? Or what is my background shaping me? How is it shaping my perception of this? So I think whatever we're given can be a wonderful starting point, but sometimes we find that we're not in the right place. So for me, I grew up in a lovely part of the world outside of Chicago. I grew up in a beautiful suburb, and it was very white, and it was very cisgender, and it was very straight, and it was very affluent. Um, so there was not a lot of diversity in that world. And as a little kid, I felt so on the margins. I never felt connected because that world wasn't made for someone like me. That was, I think, as a young person, that was my body telling me, like, this is not right for you. And I think a lot of queer people experience something similar to that, where we find ourselves, we can make it work, but we're never really fully happy because the identity of that place, or, that if we assume a mantle of heterosexual identity, as many people do for a long time, I don't know that we can do much with that, because it's not a match. It doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel right. So in terms of questioning it, I think if we approach it as a tool and we think about, well, what is identity serving me? How is identity serving me? And so that's where we can start to unpack when an identity is serving or not, whether it's a sexual identity or a religious identity or political affiliation or, something like that. Anytime we sense that something's not right, I think we can ask, well, how is this serving me now? How could it serve me? Or could another identity, if I peel back another layer, will I be able to, will things resonate a little bit more easily? Will life be a little bit easier, you know?
I'm a reading specialist. I taught reading for 19 years. I taught for 37. I started when I was 10. I was really young. No, and I taught only children with learning disabilities
Hmm.
that were discipline problems. Because my principal thought, unfortunately, when you do a good job, you get punished. And I got my reading masters, and it was the best thing I ever did.
Hmm.
They still give me all the bad kids, no matter what. But
But I think, that's one of those identities that so many kids, they get pegged as the bad kid or
yeah,
the goof off or the quiet kid or whatever.
yeah,
And everybody treats them like that. It reinforces that. So everybody around them then treats them the same way. And they keep landing in the same classroom because they're treated, if you're treated as a problem, you're going to become a problem. If you're treated as
it was
invisible,
really
you're going to
cool.
remain invisible.
My reading students didn't know they had reading problems.
Yeah.
What happened was the teachers back then, when not too far, not too right before I retired too. There was like a mandated list, but the students in the fifth grade decided they were going to decide who was mandated.
Hmm.
So they automatically, the kids in the class said, I was only supposed to take 6 children. And I wound up with 12,
Hmm.
15. They automatically came down. And they said that the reason is because they didn't know they were learning disabled. And because I did things that were crazy.
Hmm.
Nobody got bored. It was phonics and vocabulary the first day, but it was cool. The next day it was comprehension, but the third day they got to pick what they wanted to read.
Mm.
So I learned about all the basketball players, all the boxers, all
Mm.
the wrestlers, all the singers, anything they wanted. Of course, it cost me a lot of money to print everything out, but they never ever complained. And one teacher suspended the group from reading one day, and they walked out and came down without her permission.
Mm.
They said, "You can't." I cracked up laughing, and she said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "You go back upstairs because they're not going anywhere." So obviously, yeah. So the next question is this. This is interesting. Family dynamics, feeling ornamental in a big family. I do know how that fared. Why do you say you felt like an ornament growing up? My mother said that I was different than my sister and my brother. She was right. I said, but I'm smarter, so don't worry about it. Yeah, so tell you being vulnerable and how your parents drinking shaped your experience because that's difficult too.
Yeah, those questions really go hand in hand
Mm.
for my experience. I'm the youngest of 10 children, and so I'm part of a big family, a big Irish Catholic family, but I'm also significantly younger than my older siblings. The first
Mm.
9 were all born within 11 years of each other, and then there was a 7-year gap, and then
Wow.
I was a delightful surprise. So I grew up in a big family, but I also, because of the age difference from my siblings, I had the only child experience too. As but as I was becoming conscious in the world, my siblings were already out of high school and in college and getting out of college and working and building their own lives. Um, so there, that just the fact of when we were all born, that was kind of the first factor in that. But by the time I was around, and by the time I had a personality, the family culture was already set and in motion. So my siblings, my parents, they already had things rolling. There wasn't much room for me to contribute anything to family culture. And so I just kind
Mm.
of went along with it. And I was a good kid, and I was quiet, and I was. The advantage I think of having a lot of older siblings is that I got exposed to great culture. I was watching the movies that they were watching. They were in their 20s, but I was a kid watching Mel Brooks and good satire, and I was hearing good music. They introduced me to like Jim Croce and the Talking Heads, and Stuff that my generation were not exposed to yet. So the advantage, of course, I got their perspective. I got their kind of head start on culture in the world. But then I also got left behind. I got left out. And it for me, it really it comes into focus when I think about my parents' alcoholism. You know, uh,
Yeah.
and by the time I was in like middle school, they had started drinking pretty regularly. I think of them as the cocktail generation. They're like kind of the Mad Men generation. And when Mad Men came out, that was a portrait of. I was like, oh my God, that's the world that my parents were in, and as young people, and cocktail parties were a thing, and that was just part of the fabric of what you did with your friends and colleagues. So for whatever reason, for whatever issues they were facing, they drank a lot. But by that time, my siblings were all out of the house, and I was the last one left. So I got I got a really different portrait of my parents. I lived through that in a way that my siblings never had to. And I write about this in the book, trying to figure out what do I do with my parents drinking.
Uh-huh.
I had my own reasons to confront them or not confront them or talk about it or not talk about it. But my siblings had a whole different kind of approach. They even a couple of them staged an intervention on my mom, and nobody talked to me about it. I was like, I could have told you everything. I could have told you what she thought about every one of you. I could have told you how much she drank. I could have told you how much my dad drank, which they never questioned my dad. I always thought that was interesting. That my mom, because when she drank, she kind of exploded. She was a pretty serene and steady person until she started drinking, and then she externalized it. Everything. My dad, on the other hand, the more he drank, the more he withdrew. He'd shut down. He'd get quiet. He'd get kind of philosophical, and so I think he got away with kind of without notice. Whereas my mom, couldn't be ignored. that every holiday, every family dinner, every night. This was the dynamic. So my siblings only saw it on like holidays, special occasions. I saw it every night. And so when they were even confronting that and not recognizing that a vulnerable kid, like there's a 13-year-old getting into that back seat, that those two people are driving
Mm.
and they're drunk. I could see them all talking about mom and dad being drunk.
Mm.
Nobody was like, hey, you know what? Maybe somebody should pull Bill out of the car. Maybe somebody else should take him home. And it's one of those things in the process of writing the book, I was able to make a lot of peace with my parents and the pain spots. I was able to
That's sad.
let go of a lot of that with my parents. But I haven't made peace with my siblings about it yet, and I'm still kind of waiting for the apology. It's only been 30 years, but I'm sure they'll come around to it. We'll see.
In my family, it was really rough because everybody had to conform, and my mother sort of was the one everybody said what you have to wear, how you have to act, what you have
Mm,
to do, and I guess I was different. My sister was a dancer. She
mm,
danced in Broadway shows. She sang in shows.
mm,
She was brilliant and gorgeous, and I played the piano.
mm,
And there was nothing wrong with playing the piano and being a concert pianist, but it wasn't what my mother wanted.
mm,
So I said, you know what? I don't care because I taught my school and because I did all the music programs. The only thing I couldn't do was dance because I'm a klutz.
mm.
And my sister, yeah, my mother sent me to dancing school because I weighed 95 pounds. I was like this. And I said, sometimes you have to let people be different. And that's the hardest part is to
Mhm,
accept the differences in someone. And it's okay. I mean, I had teachers in my school that were gay. Who cared?
mhm.
Actually, they were some of the best teachers. And the kids, and you know what? It was really funny. The kids knew it and did not
But
say a word.
you know what? I think why were they the best teachers?
Yeah,
And I think that's a thing that I learned as a teacher myself. Having had the experience of being a
yeah,
lonely kid, having been the experience of being, growing up gay and not knowing what that meant, not,
yeah.
knowing I felt different from the people around me, but not knowing why and not having any language for it. Um, when I started teaching, that brought a whole layer of empathy, you know, not just for the queer kids that were in my school,
It's
you know, and
sad.
they were drawn to me. They would, you know, they would find me every year. I'd get at least one kid coming out, you know, by the end of the year, to me, and it was always a real honor to be chosen for that conversation, to be a safe space for a kid to be able to name something hard or, you know, ask hard questions. So that gave me and I think that's true for a lot of educators. They can, if they have experienced that pain, that marginalization, you know, if they still remember how hard it is to be a
Yeah.
child, or, you know, how hard it was to be 15. The greatest, my as a teacher, my greatest compassion was always
Oh
for
yeah.
sophomores in high school, because their bodies are just doing terrible things to them, and they have no control over that. And yet there's all the social fallout, and they get treated as adults, but they're really still thinking as kids, and it's just, um, you know. So I have great compassion for them, mostly because I remember what it felt like. I remember what it was like when I was on the margins. I remember what it felt like when I was drifting out and alone. I think the best teachers, they don't have to be queer teachers, but the best teachers can tap into that. You know, they get what kids are walking through on a daily basis. They remember what that felt like, and that helps them anticipate what kids need. You know, what in their classroom or throughout the day or after school. You know, I think that experience really forms good teachers.
It's amazing. Except I was always overweight. I didn't
Mm.
care. I didn't care. I had a thyroid problem. I didn't care. But my mother was the PTA president of my school. Definite handicap. Definite handicap.
Mm.
Because I was in sixth grade, and the teacher said I never answered a question in class because she said that my aunt was one of the top teachers in the school. The assistant principal was my parents' friend. And she just said, well, they're telling you the answers. I said, how can I tell them the answers? I'm sitting right here.
Mm.
She was horrible. I won a writing contest for the state, and she wouldn't let them take the composition because she thought somebody wrote it for me.
Mm.
At which point, I never got suspended until that day. The expletives that came out of my mouth, she had it coming. So yeah, you have to. It's hard sometimes. Now this was interesting because you have so many. I don't know if I can ask questions for every one of those sections. Why did you devote this section, the third one, to your queer identity? And I have a friend that used to work in Trader Joe's. Like I'm still friends with him on Facebook. He's married to Ryan for 25 years.
Mm.
And I love Michael. And he was the most fun Trader Joe. We used to crack up and keep the line waiting. 'Cause we didn't care what anybody was doing. So why did you make this one personal? And I think that that's great because people have to learn to accept people for who they are. And if you
Yeah.
don't, too bad.
Yeah, the third part of the book is less about you know, teaching about, you know, what it's like to be a gay person. It's more celebrating the things that helped me, that gave me vocabulary to understand myself. So you know, the first two parts of the book were essays that were written out of me trying to figure out, you know, make sense of the world and make sense of my own
Mm.
experiences. And I had landed in a place of burnout. I wanted to understand how I landed there and how to move forward. The third part of the book, though, was really born out of my kind of disillusionment with how pride gets celebrated. You know, in 2019 was the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots in New York. And the next year, 2020, was the 50th anniversary of the first Pride Parade in New York, and I think a couple other places. So it was a big landmark, you know, landmark year, and everybody was in on it. And I walked into the mall one day and to get something, and the entire mall was just an explosion of rainbows. You know, every store was rainbow branded. Everything, it was all over the place, and it felt so wrong. It felt like
Yeah.
so weird that these retail corporations had co-opted queer culture, and, like, you know, they're all saying, you know, we're all queer friendly, come shop at us, it's pride, celebrate. But never mind the fact that they are, you know, they don't have policies in place necessarily that are protecting their employees or supporting their employees. Never mind that some of those very corporations were the ones that were funding politicians who were very actively working against queer rights and queer protections. So it felt really hypocritical. And I went to the Pride Parade that year in 2019, and sure, there was lots of joy and there was lots to celebrate about the progress that we'd made. But every float, was these giant corporate floats, these banks and these giant
Yeah.
companies. And then you've got the community organizations like PFLAG, or a little church or a little synagogue that is marching. And how exciting is it for that little church to be marching? But they're this tiny little thing, so between two behemoth corporate floats. And I thought, that's not right. That's not. It shouldn't be an advertising parade. It should be something else. So I wanted to think about how do we bring it back? How do we make it more about us, and how do we personalize it? So I started setting time aside every day during June, which is the month that we start to celebrate Pride. And I'd think about a person or a book or a movie that was really important to me as a queer person, whether because as a kid it showed me something that I hadn't seen anywhere else, or it was as a young adult something that I was struggling with, and this book or this movie gave me some direction or some comfort. Um, so the third part of the book is, it grows out of that practice of just taking some time every day, think about what were the things, what were the experiences that really helped me shape my own identity, and how can I celebrate that? How has that impacted me? How has that stayed with me through my life? So there's a lot of TV shows. I talk about the Golden Girls and Designing Women, and I talk about some movies like Camp, and that featured queer characters. That I could imagine, like, what would life be if I went to a queer friendly summer camp when I was a kid. But then also some of the old classics that have stayed in the imagination. Joan Crawford to me remains
Well,
the
what's going
great
on in the news too is very prevalent
advocate
about this too.
actor.
And the problem is that people don't accept people for what they believe and who they are. And that's what's even more. Well, look at the person that's running the government. He doesn't accept people for anything. He just thinks he's right. He has to learn to accept everybody. It doesn't matter because everybody's a person and different. So they
Mm.
told me. Now this is interesting. What happened? I'm going to skip the next section because it take forever. Catholic education. Did you have a problem in school? And Dan Savage, it gets better. How did that speech change your life? I read that 3 times.
Oh, the Dan Savage ruined
Yeah,
my life
you
essay.
know, in order to do a review, because first of all, Shirley's phenomenal.
Hmm.
I need her to help me when I write my next one. She's phenomenal, and I never know what she's going to send me to
Mm.
review. But the funny part is that she doesn't say, "Do you want to review it?" She said, "The interview just set up the interview. The book's in the mail." She didn't ask if I wanted it.
Just she knows what you need. She knows what you like.
She's amazing, and I said, "You know what? She hasn't. She's given me some odd ones." And I've read every single one that
Mm.
she did. The only one and she wasn't her that sent this was a book about a town when a person gets to be a certain age, at the end of the month they kill the oldest person as
Oh,
a sacrifice. I couldn't read it. Could not read that.
dark.
Yeah, that was like so, yeah, I couldn't. I mean, the person wasn't sick. They just picked somebody.
Yeah,
Forget
yeah,
that.
yeah,
So, Catholic education, and what does primacy of conscience and trumps everything else mean?
yeah.
I mean, how did you feel? Were you included in church? Did the priest give you a hard time?
No, I had a really positive experience of religion growing up, and
Mm.
this I recognize is really. I had a really different experience than a lot of queer people. I grew up in a Catholic family that was not, oh, what the Pope says goes. We had a Catholic family. My parents were trained by the Jesuits, and they were educated by the Jesuits, and they were much more interested in having
Mm.
thinking people as Catholic children. And that's where my mom really introduced to us and really emphasized this idea of the primacy of conscience, which I think of it as like Catholic moral disobedience. If there is this notion in Catholic theology that your conscience is that part of you that is closest to God. And so if your conscience is telling you something's wrong or something's right, then that's the final authority, not local laws, not customs, not the Pope himself. My mom used to say, "Oh, the Pope is just another priest. What does he know?" And so that it was your conscience. So when I was growing up, even when I was getting some negative messaging around queer stuff, it wasn't coming from my church. It wasn't coming from my parish. It wasn't being talked about. That's a different
Uh,
problem. But I wasn't getting the negative messaging from them. And I had this notion really ingrained in me that if my conscience tells me it's right, it's right. So I never felt a conflict between being gay and being Catholic. I
that's
never
good.
felt the conflict. Um, and like I said, that's very different from other people's experiences. But I had a really good experience in Catholic schools too. I loved my religion classes, and I studied religion in high school and college and grad school. I did a master's in the comparative study of religion, and I started teaching and working as a campus minister. Um, at a little Catholic girls' school outside of Boston, and it was wonderful. I loved the work. I loved the community. I loved my kids. I loved my colleagues. It just everything was great because I could channel so much of what I was interested in and passionate about into this work. But I could also I felt like I could move the needle a little bit in the Catholic Church. If nothing else, these kids had a gay campus minister. you know, so if but I wanted them to feel engaged. I wanted them to feel like the church wasn't the buildings and the authority in Rome. The church was us here and the traditions that we engage and that we want to disseminate and hold on to. So I really worked with this assumption that I was going to be able to move the needle. Now, I couldn't talk about being gay. All my students knew, but I couldn't talk about it because of the rules of Catholic schools.
Yeah,
If
you
you
couldn't
are
do that.
in
Yeah,
violation of the Catholic teaching, then you shouldn't be working there. Well, I was in a very safe place. My bosses, my colleagues, it was a very friendly and protective environment. But we all had that unspoken policy of like, depending on who's around, if certain parents were around, if certain colleagues were around, you didn't talk about the gay stuff. You didn't talk about the
you
stuff that
couldn't. Yeah, I know. You still
rattle.
can't.
And it's a lot of pressure on teachers in those schools because, if somebody rings a bell about you, if you're in a diocesan school, they go to the diocese and the diocese comes down on the school. I worked in order schools. So if somebody had a complaint about me,
Oh,
if
whoa.
diocese, then the diocese would go to the Vatican. The Vatican would go to the order, and the order would come down on the school. So that is the burden that every queer educator working in Catholic schools walks into school with every day, knowing that they could take down the whole school just
That's
if
hard.
somebody had
Yeah.
a problem with them. But that wasn't at the fore of my mind. What was at the fore of my mind was I loved my work and I loved my kids, and I thought I could move the needle. Then I went to a conference in Seattle in I think it was 2012. Dan Savage was speaking about the It Gets Better project, and the It Gets Better project is Dan and his husband Terry wanted to get a message to kids through YouTube that it gets better. There was a rash of really horrific and disheartening suicides among queer teenagers. And so that really inspired in them. We need to get the message like it's going to get better. You're going to get out. It's going to get better. So he told the story about starting it. They hoped for 100 videos, and within a week they had, a couple hundred, and now they've got 65, 70,000 videos of people who have sent the message in because they want to send
Mm.
the message to kids. It gets better. So everybody was super moved by this. It was really riveting. Dan is a great speaker. He's very dynamic. And after he wrapped up his kind of comments, then the Q&A started. A woman stood up and asked a written question. She explained, "I'm writing the question from somebody else who can't stand up in this environment. Even standing up to ask a question would risk her job." And everybody in the room was like, "Oh, could you imagine working at a place like that? Oh, my
Yeah.
God, those of us in religious schools." We were like, "Oh, yeah, we get it." Do we know each other? Yeah. The and my So she went on with the question, and she said, uh, "I'm a queer teacher. I want to be here for my queer students. It's a very religious, conservative
Yeah, I know.
environment.
They asked you that. I know.
Yeah, and so what do we do? How can what can I do to better support my students? And Dan took a minute and he cocked his head and he said, "You're not going to like my response." He said,
I got
"You need to get
hired.
your you need to get your
I
resume
got
in
hired
order."
teaching walking down the street. The assistant principal of the school saw me. She was my mother. I don't know, it was a curse or whatever. I had just been accepted as the musical director of an elementary school,
Hmm.
and I really didn't want to do that. I wanted to make a difference, even though I didn't know what I was doing. So I got hired to teach sixth grade, and the principal gave me 36 kids that were bad. And I don't mean disrespectful, I mean dangerous. You had no idea what they were going to do. I mean, you're coming into teaching, and they ask the teaching test, why are you teaching? I go, I guess. I don't know. It's a hard question.
Mm.
I walked into the room and they weren't throwing, they were just nasty. And some of them got in trouble over the weekend, got arrested. They were really bad. And then they knew more curse words than they thought I did. So I put the curse words on the board as vocabulary lesson. I swear to God. I was 17 years old. What the heck did I know? And I put all the bad words on the board and they said, "Do you know what this word is?" And they said, "No." "Do you know what it means?" I go, "Well, then I'm a big, you know what?" And I'm the only one that could use it. In about 25 minutes, they looked at me. I said, "And if you want to see what happens when I become the big B, it's a 500-word composition right now for apologizing for being a bunch of." So it was fun. And one of the kids turned around and said, "Well, Mrs. Wolf would give us 700." I go, "Let's make it 1,500. Count the words and make sure you don't leave any out, or I'll double it." Never had it. 37 years, never had to say a word ever again. I mean, yeah, you got to be tough,
That
man.
was a very different environment for me. That was a very different environment for
Yeah,
me. Yeah. No, but Dan's
yeah.
response changed my life because he thought about it. He said, "You need to get your resume in
Don't you
order."
just love it?
We thought we were in those schools to be with those kids, to let them know, like, someone like you is here. Like, I'm going to keep an eye out for you. It's great. He said, "You may think that what you're doing
Yeah.
is that. What you're really doing is sending the message that it's okay to leave part of yourself at the door on the way into work in the morning." And I could never unhear that. I could never. It immediately turned upside down my self understanding as an educator and in my work. So that for me started the process of figuring out, okay, up to this point, I had spent 8, 9, 10, over a decade in Catholic schools, and I saw my future working in Catholic schools. Suddenly, that future evaporated, and I had to reinvent myself as an educator. It was a very powerful moment, and for me, it was. I think what I learned from Dan, it wasn't just that particular insight that that I was potentially sending kids that message. Um, it really made me open my eyes to see the ways that I had choice. I had agency. I didn't have to work there. And why would I put myself in that kind of a danger every day? When equal marriage became law,
Yeah.
state by state, when it was state by state, a state would announce, it would go legal. And then there would be within a couple of months, there would be a rash of firings of queer educators from those schools, because marriage is a public record. And so suddenly your sexual orientation is a matter of public record. And so people would be scouring the rosters of, newly legalized marriages, and they would be reporting them in. So you'd see this. So I was like, how can I work in this environment when people like me are just getting swept aside just because they're queer? Never mind whether they're an effective educator. Never mind whether they're loving to their students. Never mind what they've contributed to their schools. We're just cast out based on that. So I couldn't go back to that, and it made me see that I had more control. I had more agency in this, and that if I wanted to see change, I wasn't responsible for making that change. If I wanted to see a more inclusive church, it was not on me. I'm inclusive enough. I do that work, but it's everybody else who has to start doing the work. And I don't need to put myself in that situation over and over again for myself or as an example to anybody coming behind me. And that really was was what I learned from Dan Savage in that moment. It was incredibly powerful. I don't know. I'd love to meet him sometime and be like, "You ruined my life. Thank you so much." I'd love to be
Now,
able to.
before I forget, the 29th, Eleanor Kearns, the 20, the 22nd of October, Death on Dickens Island, Marilyn Emerson. Now, this is the big one. This is the shocker, people. On the 27th, the number one author on this planet, Peter James, from England. The title is Hawk is Dead, and the main character is Queen Camilla, who's his friend, and she might join me.
Hmm.
I don't know. Yes. Next one is Dante Baker. She's a research scientist with NASA and astronauts. On the 31st, Ashley Fontaine, but on the 30th, it depends on how you think about Paul. This is hilarious. The guy wrote a book called Humpty Trumpty, Trump's second 20 days of his first 20 days of his second presidency, and it's hilarious.
Hmm.
The poems are good, so that's I'm excited about that, and I'm brave to do that anyway. But why did you write this book just to carry the casket and when to say the mass now? And people have to accept people for who they are, and they don't. And that's what the scary part is. I mean, I meet people at the hairdressers, and I love everybody. Everybody's the same to me. I've always been like that. My father taught me, you're who you are and accept your friends. If they don't like you, too bad. Whereas other people in my family feel that if you don't marry somebody within your religion, you don't belong here. They get disowned. And that's wrong too. So
Mhm.
how did you choose this title? That's really cool. Six to carry the casket, one to say the mass now. And who did you write it for? And after reading this book, I mean, I took away a lot,
Mm.
and there's a lot of differences, and I learned that it's okay to be who you are. It's okay to be different. My mother didn't think that. She said, like I said, I went to family dinners and I had to help everybody do their homework and their term papers because I was smarter than them. So I resented going. After a while, I pretended to be sick
Mhm.
because you know what? Either you are, you are. And she would say to me, "Well, you're not pretty. You're overweight. You're not like your sister." I said, "I know I'm not like my sister. My sister was brilliant and smart." I said, "I'm just very smart. Either take it or leave it." So who did you write this for, and how did you choose that title? It really it's different.
I wrote it for me. It didn't start as a book. It didn't start intending to be anything anybody else would be reading in total. I started writing after a period of burnout. I had been working in schools for a long time, and then I hit just a terrible rough patch. Both of my parents and one of my sisters died within about a year and a half of each other, just as I was starting a role as a middle school principal. And I burned out, and I had nothing. I really broke, and I really had nothing left. And I took time off to heal and to recover, and I thought I was going to be running back to schools, and I was not. So I was trying to figure out, okay, well, what's next? What am I going to do when I grow up? And I started writing to help me figure that out. I wanted to figure out how I landed in this place of burnout, but I also wanted to figure out what I wanted to carry forward. Who did I want to be in the next phase of my life, and what resources can I tap into for that? Um, I started writing, and then 2020 happened, and then we all landed in a place of burnout with the pandemic and the social division, and so I kept writing, but I wanted to figure out how we all landed there, and I wanted to think about and unpack not just how do we land there, but how do we move forward, and what's the world that we want to create? What do we want to hold on to? After a while, I stepped back and saw a through line through a lot of the essays about identity, and I thought, okay, well, there's something here, and a couple of friends encouraged me to pursue it, and so I started pursuing, publishing it, and I was able to get this great relationship with Peanut Butter Publishing, and Danielle Harvey was my editor, and she was wonderful to shepherd me through the process, and she was a great resource through it all. Um, I picked, and it was interesting. Picking the title was actually kind of tough because it was because at some level, all the essays are kind of all over the place. It's all about me, but it's not all about me. It's some family stuff, some work stuff, some intellectual, some musings,
It's
some
very personal. It's very good,
very personal. But
and it hits home.
and
So are
so
you going to write another one?
I went back to my first identity, what my mom used to say all the time. So people would say to her, like, you have 10
Yeah.
children. That's amazing. And and they'd say, 7 sons. How did you have 7 sons? And she'd say, well, God gave me 7 sons for a reason. 6 to carry the casket and 1 to say the mass. Now that was her quip to shut down the conversation and move on to the next thing. It was always very witty, very Irish Catholic humor. But I heard that it was clear by the time I was conscious. None of my older brothers were heading to the seminary, so I heard that as like, oh, I guess I'm the one to say the mass. So it was one of my first adopted identities, I think. And even when I majored in religious studies, when I went to divinity school, I think my mom was seeing a prophecy fulfilling of like, oh, I'm finally getting a priest in the family. I think she didn't get a priest in me, but she got a campus minister, and I one of the most beautiful gifts I ever got from my mom was the chance to plan her funeral with her. A few weeks before she died, she went off of hospice care, and I went in for the weekend to visit. And it was the last time I saw her, and we were watching a movie, and she turned to me in the middle of Sound of Music and said, there's a song I'd like at my funeral. I thought, oh, okay. Grab my laptop. I was like, I understand what we're doing here. We're gonna start planning. So we planned her funeral together, and it was a wonderful gift. Uh, and so that last weekend, that last moment that I was able to share with my mom, kind of goes back to that thing she used to say all the time: 6 to carry the casket and 1 to say the mass. Well, here I am. I'm not saying the mass, but I'll help you plan it. Yeah. So
So
that's
are you writing another one? Is there a sequel coming to this?
I don't know if it's a sequel per
Going to
se.
write something else?
I've got 2 projects on the horizon. The first one is about weddings. In the other part of my life, I'm a ritual designer, and I do a lot of work around weddings, wedding ceremonies. And I'd like to offer a different kind of approach to planning a wedding, and starting with the ceremony, starting with not starting with event planning. We've got plenty of event planning guides, but how do we rethink weddings to make sure that they are authentic, and that they reflect the identities and the values and the experiences of the people who are getting married, and that the ceremonies are communicating what the people at the center
That might be an interest.
communicate. So
That
that's
might
my
be
next
an interesting title. I've read like the last 10 books have been about people that have come out in the middle of the book,
one.
and yeah, I'm getting an awful lot. What can I say? But
Mm-hmm.
for the best present I got was my students are all on Facebook. The ones I taught for reading and whatever, they're all on Facebook, all 50 of them, and they know they let me know they're there because if they have for some reason if they have a problem, they call me literally on the phone. Mrs. Lewis, I go,
Mm-hmm.
which one are you? And I love them, and they're all activists or teachers or dealing with caregiving. The most amazing bunch of students I've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
And one said the other day, he said it on the air too. If not for her, I'd be in Rikers Island because she kept me out of trouble. But this has been fun. Teaching is the greatest profession in the world. And when you do a good job, you get punished because you get all the hardest jobs. I love teaching reading, but every year was a double grade, 3, 4, 4, 5, and there were discipline problems. Every one of them. And there was one class that they called the 5-6 class from H, and I was absent one morning, and I got called by the principal, who called my mother to tell me to come to school because they couldn't handle my class. That's how bad they were. I'm sorry, 5 feet tall. These kids were the boys were like 10 feet. They were really bad, and they said no one will take the class. I said they'll call the parents of course and send the boys home. I came to school with 104 fever, and I looked at them and I go, "You're going to pay for this." I was never absent the rest of the year. I could not be absent. No, no, my principal was afraid of. They were really bad. I mean, they would bring knives and didn't do it when I was there. They were fine. So I got even with them. I had to take them to Great Adventure on the senior trip. 26 of the worst kids in America. The girls were fine. So I said to the girls, just do what I say. I took the girls off the bus and left the boys with my assistant principal for the day. At the end of the day, he said, I'm going to kill you. I said, now you know what I went through for 12 months. It was hilarious. But
Yeah.
thank you so much. Where can everybody get this book and know more about you?
You can find all you need to know about me on my website, billhulssman.com. You can find the book, Six to Carry the Casket, One to Say the Mass, anywhere you buy books, your local independent bookstore, All Store, Barnes & Noble, Amazon.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so it's anywhere you want to find it. And my goal isn't for people to know, the book is all about me. So you're going to get to know me really well, but that's not the goal. The goal is not just to get to know me. The goal is I hope it sparks some questions in other readers' lives. Think about like, what were the relationships? What were the experiences that helped you shape your identity? And whether you're queer or not, what were the things that made you feel seen and known in the world, or gave you hope, or gave you some direction? That's what I hope readers can take away from it too, is a sense of it's worth taking time to step back and reflect, and to figure out what I want to carry forward, and who I want to be